morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here live in studio with my co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together we are crafting an hour of radio which may well change your life. It's called For a Green Future, and what we do is we talk about the environment, we talk about ecology, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness. And the way the show's set up, we got about 15 minutes here where we're just going to chat. And then we have a guest coming on. His name is Mark Jacobson. It's a recorded interview, but he's going to tell us about, we're going to talk a little bit about the carbon dioxide level measurements at Mauna Loa. And regular listeners to the show know that I've been kind of freaking out about this for the last 2 weeks, but he has some reassuring things to say. He's not too reassuring, but definitely he's not as worried about it as I have been.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
It's very nervous-making what's going on.
Then at the bottom of the hour, we'll hear from our wonderful, fantastic, visionary sponsors and patrons. And then Rebecca Wood is going to be talking to us about tomatoes.
Yep.
All right. And then we've got our ecological news. And hopefully during this hour, we also hear from you at 877-909-1007. Or at any time you can text 419-973-5841. And I noticed driving in today, I was listening to Mick Gonzalez's show as I was driving in. I noticed a couple things. One is the signal does not seem to be reaching as far as usual. I actually got halfway through Perrysburg before it stopped being overwhelmed by a country music station out of Michigan. So if you're somebody who normally listens to us every morning and you're like struggling and like swearing at the country music that you're hearing, which
it's not your radio.
No, it's not your radio. It's the signal that
some country music isn't that bad.
Well, that's your opinion, Rebecca.
Unpopular opinion.
Yes. But remember,
I'm going to get made fun of so bad by everyone on Facebook for that.
But remember, you can always listen. You can always tune in live on 100.7's internet channel. You can listen live on the internet channel. So if you're somebody who likes to listen to the show and you're having trouble, just go to the internet and you can listen to us that way. Something else I wanted to mention is, normally, even though this is a sports channel, we don't normally talk too much about sports here on For a Green Future. But I'm going to make an exception this week on the topic of Guardians versus Indians. You probably heard I actually called in to Mick Gonzalez's show in the previous hour. And if that's something you want to talk about, we will make room for you here on the show today.
Truthfully, I have an opinion. Okay, it's great. It's a cool bridge and stuff. But when I lived in Cleveland and had to go over that bridge, the giant eunuch robots kind of freaked me out.
A little scary.
Creepy. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, just, imagining them guarding you.
Right. They're on my side. Okay.
Right.
Feeling better.
If the evil Transformers show up, maybe those guys will pop out of the bridge and start fighting with them.
There should be a movie. That's our theme for the There should be a movie about that.
So, and, just to repeat, when I ran for U.S. Senate back in 2016 on the Green Party line, I got invited by a Native American group to come to one of their protests during the World Series there at Cleveland, and I was talking with them for hours, and Mick was talking about the lack of cojones these days, but I have to tell you that that group who were there, and thousands of people went by, and a lot of those people were not happy with what the protest. I
remember in the 90s, they were getting out and protesting against that name. And this is Cleveland. Clevelanders get very upset by change. Well, okay, really, I think Clevelanders want the world to be stuck between 1950 and 1970, basically.
Yeah.
The fact that it existed before that and went on after that, at least in the 90s, perpetually upset them.
Right. Well,
so you're changing the name of something that they like a lot. Oh, my God, it's the end of the world, So that's some cojones right there, you ask me.
Well,
you try it sometime, you think it's easy.
Yeah, well, these are the 2020s, so it may be the end of the world. But,
yeah, there we go. We can get the name change.
But
first.
change can be very good. And like I said, I really like Guardians. I think it's a really dramatic name. And
it's
a cool name. And, if you disagree, I will entertain your opinion on that subject this week.
Well, there would also been, okay, the Cleveland torso killers. They're famous for that, right?
Yeah. Okay, I'd forgotten about. I'd repressed all that.
Something about the salt mine disaster. I read this book when I lived there called "They Died Crawling in Slime." It was great.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. I really liked Cleveland. That's the thing. I liked living there.
Well,
a lot, but Clevelanders were kind of stuck in sticks in the mud in a lot of ways.
Well, and people talk about how, we're forgetting history. We're trying to get rid of history. And I can't help but think, you mean the history where we took Cleveland from the Indians by military force, or the history where we put generations of Native American children into schools, that we took them away from their families and put them in boarding schools.
Guess what, baby dolls? Cuyahoga, actually not an English name.
Yeah, I mean, or maybe even the forced sterilizations.
Not a European name at all, in fact.
Yeah, the U.S. government sterilized Native American women without their permission for about 50 years in order to, wipe them out. That was the goal, was to eliminate Native Americans. Is that the history that we're supposed to be remembering when we think about the Cleveland Indians?
They were apparently doing that to people in prison much later than that.
Yeah, well, this was just women would go in for a checkup, or they'd be having menstrual problems, and without their knowledge or permission, they would get sterilized.
Or, I heard sometimes, when you had appendicitis or something, you're like, well, we're in there, let's just go ahead and blah, blah, and not let her know.
Yeah, it was terrible. So
pretty much.
So there is a lot of history to remember, and in the record books, as sports fans know, it will always say Cleveland Indians. They're not going to go back and revise the records. It was the Cleveland Indians that were in the World Series in 2016, which was a great World Series. It was really exciting. So anyway, on with the show. I did want to talk about something that happened this week, and just chatting wise. One thing. A lot of people seem to be interested in my Three Sisters experiment in my garden, where I've planted corns, beans, and squash together. And I just wanted to report that the corn is between 7 and 8 feet tall right now. We got squash on the vine. The vines have spread out and taken up about 3 times the area of the mound, and there's squash on the vines. And the beans have sort of intertwined themselves with all the corn stalks. And so now that whole thing is kind of an interconnected system, which,
like it's supposed to be.
Which the winds, we had the big storm the other day. The winds aren't blowing the corn down because the beans are actually kind of supporting it.
Right.
So, and the corn has tassels.
Kind of like rebar.
Yeah, kind of like rebar, right? And so the corn has tassels, and so it's looking like, so far this experiment is a big success.
Yeah.
We'll see what we get in terms of corn and actual squash. Although something else about my garden, a problem I've never had before, deer.
Uh-oh.
The word apparently has gotten out amongst the critters that we have a successful garden this year.
At Joe's place.
Because I was amazed to find deer tracks in my garden. I've got a big rabbit fence, which is about 4 foot high, which keeps the rabbits out, but it's not near enough to keep deer out, so... Also, if anybody has any tips for me on how to save my garden from these nightly deer visits.
Big fences, I think.
Yeah, give us a call, 877-909-1007.
Wolf urine, something like that. I don't know.
Okay. And one other thing that I did want to mention in our first little check section here is, did you see the red sun? Did you, on Tuesday morning, look up and, I was getting up doing my usual morning routine and doing the dishes. That's what I do every morning, is I get all the dishes cleared. So we start the day with clear dishes. And as I was doing my stuff on that morning, I was thinking, wow, it must be much earlier than I thought. The sun isn't nearly up yet. And I went out and I looked, and yeah, the sun was up. There was just no light to speak of because it was covered, but it was red. It was just this dull red ball. And the reason, of course, was that the fires out west were sending their smoke all the way across the continent, and it affected us directly. I mean, we could see the effect of the western fires. And a lot of people also don't know that because the U.S. media is always focused on U.S. fires, Ontario, just over the river from us, is also burning. They've got They've got like 30 or 40 big fires going right now. So it's not a far off thing that doesn't affect you. On Tuesday, you could
Ontario, that's kind of Ohio North, really.
Yeah, really, just over the river. And, if you look at the fire map for Ontario, it's just covered in fire. There's dozens and dozens of them. And the way the winds go, some of that does get circulated down to us, too. So, and this is one that also directly affects people in terms of health. People, especially people with asthma, young people, inhale that smoke, those particulates. And my weather app has a little, air quality monitor thing on it. And on Tuesday, it did not look good. It was pretty nasty.
I could smell smoke. I was pretty sure, on and off on like at least 3 days this week. Of course, we don't have a strong neighborhoods association,
right,
where I live.
So there
which
is
means you can kind of do your own thing. So it's hard, but it's also hard to tell if somebody maybe is burning some trash someplace. So
right.
I couldn't tell. But yeah, it seems like I was smelling smoke more than usual.
Or a forest off on the West Coast,
maybe an Ontario forest or something. Yeah. Either that or some trash pods. It's hard to tell.
Okay. So someone just sent us a text and asked basically if they had the right number to send a text. So, yes, you have the right number. It's 419-973-5841. So if you want to actually send a text with content,
there we go.
We'll be happy to hear it. And in fact, we'll give you a minute to get onto it because we're going to go to our interview with Mark Jacobson pretty soon here. But I want to set that interview up a little bit. For the past 2 weeks, I've been reporting about the graph of recent monthly mean CO2 at Mauna Loa Observatory that's put out by the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I got freaked out because usually between May and June, there's a sharp drop-off in the CO2 levels because that's when the plants up here in the northern hemisphere start growing, especially the ones, the taiga up around the poles. That's what absorbs the most CO2. But they start growing.
Is that taiga or taiga?
Taiga.
Or does no one know?
It's probably taiga.
Because I'm going to get into that in my segment about tomatoes.
Really?
There's something just nobody knows how it's pronounced.
Interesting. Well, we'll say taiga.
Okay.
Right, but this year there wasn't that sharp drop off that there normally was, and so I kept stressing about it until I finally contacted Mark Jacobson, who is an expert in this field, and he has some reassuring stuff to tell me, and so I think you'll find this reassuring, but I still have some questions, and we'll talk about those after the interview. But I think. Let's go ahead, Josh. Let's start our interview with Mark Jacobson.
I'm Mark Jacobson, Stanford University, serve civil and environmental engineering.
Thanks so much for coming on the show, Mark. The reason that I asked you on is because I've been kind of, how should I put this, freaking out a little bit since I looked at the graph from the NOAA Observatory at Mauna Loa, looking at the levels of CO2. And when I looked at that chart, I saw that there wasn't as sharp a drop between May and June as there has been in past years. And I was afraid this might mean that the CO2 getting put into the atmosphere is sort of overwhelming the usual dropping that happens in spring when the leaves and the trees all start growing up in the northern hemisphere. But you read that a little differently.
Yeah, it's not clear unless we look at kind of longer terms, in fact looking at the rest of 2021 to see what's going on. But my first look at it was that the May is usually when you have the highest carbon dioxide levels at Mauna Loa. And the difference between May of 2021 and May of 2020 was about 1.9 parts per million. But the year before, between May of 2019 and May of 2020, it was actually higher. It was like 2.3 or 4 parts per million. And so my take on it is, well, there was probably actually less CO2 added to the atmosphere, probably due to the pandemic between 1920 and 21. And so we're just seeing a lower increase between the two Mays. And then and that's actually causing, if there were a higher increase, then you would see the decline, the spring decline, as you would in previous years. So it just seems like it's hard to tell until we actually look at more data. But right now, I'm not alarmed by it.
Okay.
By that result.
Well, that reassures me quite a bit. So basically, you're saying that the peak is not as sharp, and so then the drop off from that peak also isn't as sharp.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, let's sure hope you're right. And I guess, as you say, we need more data. It'll be very interesting to see what happens to the month of July when that comes out. But so even with this reassurance on, in terms of the peak and the trough for this year, the numbers are still really, really high, right?
Yeah. So it's not to say that we shouldn't be concerned, because in fact CO2 is still going up, and we need it to go down. And it's the fact that it's still going up, it does not bode well for the planet. We're pretty much, the peak is now near 420 parts per million. And the pre-industrial level is about 275 parts per million. So we're at 145 parts per million higher than what we should be at. And to solve this problem, we need to eliminate CO2 emissions. And if we do eliminate CO2 emissions, if we eliminate 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2050, then we can see a decline, because existing CO2 in the atmosphere is going to stay there for a long time. It takes about anywhere from 50 to 100 years for the CO2 to start declining once you stop emitting it. And so we think that by 2100, if we can stop 80% of emissions by 2030 and 100% by 2050, we can get down to 350 parts per million by 2100. But that requires elimination of virtually all emissions, and that means changing our energy infrastructure. Energy is about 75 to 80% of CO2 emissions and about 90 to 95% of air pollution emissions. But we need to eliminate all energy emissions, and then non-energy emissions, which include biomass burning emissions from permanent deforestation, methane from agriculture, like rice paddies and cows and sheep and cattle and chickens, and also landfills, and nitrous oxide from fertilizers, and halogens, which are about 9% of global warming. There's a lot of halogen buildup in the atmosphere, and there's still emissions that are affecting climate. So we have to eliminate all energy emissions and non-energy emissions as fast as possible. Otherwise, the CO2 is going to keep going up, and that's going to keep affecting climate. I should point out that CO2 is only about 45% of the warming that's occurring. So while there is a focus on that, 55% of the warming is due to a combination of black carbon, which is the second leading cause of global warming, and that comes from diesel vehicles, jet fuel, kerosene burning, biomass burning. It's this black smoke you see behind a diesel bus, for example, and that operates by warming the atmosphere by absorbing sunlight directly, as opposed to greenhouse gases, which don't absorb sunlight. They absorb heat radiation from the earth. But black carbon warms the atmosphere 1 million times more powerfully per unit mass than carbon dioxide. But it's much shorter lived. It only lasts a few weeks to months in the atmosphere. But it's because it's always emitted, you always have a big impact of it. It's the second leading cause of warming. And methane also is the third leading cause of warming, and that needs to be controlled. Then there's nitrous oxide, there's ozone in the lower atmosphere that's causing additional warming, and there are also other minor constituents. So, as I mentioned, halogens are a big factor as well. There's a big problem, and we need a big solution, but the good news is there is a solution possible if we put our minds to it.
I follow your Twitter feed, and I see, quite frequently when you see some of these solutions being implemented, you tweet them back out again to sort of show us that it is possible to do this, because there are people claiming it's just impossible. We can't get rid of carbon. In fact, you did one just yesterday about a new process for making steel that takes the carbon out of that process.
Yeah, so that's a hydrogen reduction process. So instead of using carbon to purify iron, because right now we have iron oxide, and then you react carbon with it, and the carbon combines with the oxygen in the iron oxide, and that gets converted to CO2, which gets released to the air chemically, and then the result is pure iron. Now, you can use instead hydrogen to react with the iron oxide to purify the iron. And so that actually, there's a new plant in Sweden actually that has successfully done this now to actually purify iron using hydrogen reduction instead of carbon reduction. And then iron is combined to form steel with other materials. And so this will actually allow the elimination of about 97.2% of all carbon emissions from steel. About half the carbon emissions are due to energy, and then the other half are due to this chemical reaction. So if you make all the energy from clean renewable energy and you change to hydrogen reduction instead of carbon reduction, then you can eliminate 97.2% of all carbon emissions associated with steel. And it turns out there are also ways to do that with concrete as well, using what's called geopolymer concrete, which doesn't have any chemical emissions of carbon dioxide. And there's another one called ferroc, which is an alternative to concrete, which doesn't have nearly so much carbon dioxide emissions. So there are solutions to cement manufacturing and steel, and also other industrial processes that currently emit carbon dioxide.
You have pretty much put your career into promoting the idea that we can do this, that this is possible. We can change these processes. We can change our energy sources. But also part of what you do, though, is create computer models to model the atmosphere. And I'm sure you're familiar with all the disasters that have been happening the past few weeks, the flooding in Germany, the heat dome over the northwest of North America. And some news reports are saying that this is showing that we really don't have a handle on just how fast and how serious the global warming is progressing. They're saying there might be that our models are actually too conservative in their predictions. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the computer models they actually provide a range, and so there's different confidence intervals, and I'm pretty sure these impacts are somewhere in that range. They might be in the more extreme end, but so I wouldn't say that they're not accounted for in the estimates, computer model estimates. Although very specific weather events aren't modeled. I mean, climate models model just that, climate, which is the average of all weather events over time and space, and don't actually predict individual weather events. So it's hard to say that specific weather events weren't predicted by climate models. It's because that's not the job of a climate model. They don't actually try to even or pretend to predict individual weather events. But what we're seeing is certainly a manifestation of large-scale impacts. We're going to have more extreme heat. We'll have more extreme, rainfall events, more extreme droughts. There are a lot of impacts that are coming, and we'll certainly have more wildfires, because when you have hotter, drier seasons, then you're going to end up with more fires being triggered, and also lasting long. These are all expected results. Now, the time frame of the expectation, I think it might be a surprise to people who don't believe in global warming, because they just thought any different weather event was just natural. But now these weather events are becoming more extreme, and so they're becoming more unnatural. And I think the people who don't believe in global warming are now waking up to the problem. So again, we need to solve the problem, not just focus on we have to try to ameliorate the damage that's being done, but the key is to prevent future damage, which is really to eliminate emissions starting today, and make really aggressive efforts to eliminate fossil fuels, eliminate combustion of anything, including bioenergy, biomass. We have to electrify all energy and provide the electricity with just clean, renewable wind and water and solar power, which includes geothermal as well. And we need battery storage. We need electric vehicles and appliances. People can do this in their own home to electrify everything, get rid of natural gas in buildings. There are a lot of steps increasing energy efficiency, weatherizing your home, commuting less, telecommuting more, things like that.
Right, and you actually have a book where you lay out all these strategies.
Yeah, so I finished a book in last year that's called 100% Clean Renewable Energy and Storage for Everything, which it really lays out the problems and our proposed solutions, which are to electrify everything and transition to clean renewable energy in all energy sectors. And we try to keep the grid stable as well. And so I talk about techniques of doing that and look at many of the technologies that exist. We have about 95% of what we need, and the rest we know how to do. It's just we haven't really commercialized those. So this is all described in the book, and how we can solve these problems of air pollution, global warming, and energy security simultaneously through changing to clean renewable energy.
And I have a copy. It's a great book. Lots of nice pictures in it, too. I appreciate those. You know, it is funny that the people who deny global warming, the people who pretend that this actually isn't happening, if you finally pin them down, they'll pivot to say, but it might be happening, but there's nothing we can do about it. I think that laying out the framework to show, yes, we can do this is very valuable at this time.
Yeah, we can definitely do it. And, the numbers are there. We have the technologies. We have the materials. It won't take up huge amounts of land. It'll reduce costs substantially. I mean, if we electrify everything, we need on the order of 55 to 60% less energy because of the efficiency of electricity over combustion. And that means even if the cost per unit energy were the same, we'd have the total annual cost that people are paying would be 55 to 60% lower. And you can see that if you have an electric car, you can see that in your own fuel bill. It's like 1/4 to 1/5 that of a gasoline vehicle, because it costs on the order of 80 cents a gallon of gasoline to charge an electric car versus $3 or $4 a gallon for driving a gasoline car. So, if you look over all energy sectors, you just save a huge amount of energy and save a huge amount of money. And then plus on top of that, the cost per unit energy are now cheaper with wind and solar in particular. Those are the cheapest forms of new electricity in the world today. So there's a lot of reason to change, not only in terms of cost benefits. There are 7 million people who die from air pollution each year. We eliminate those by transitioning to clean renewable energy. We eliminate climate problems. We use less land overall than the fossil fuel industry, which consumes 1.3% of U.S. land area, for example. And we provide energy security for generations to come.
That's a point we try to make over and over here on For Green Futures, that you'll actually, if we go to the green future, you'll actually have more money in your pocket. You'll be more comfortable. And, you're talking about electric cars. I have a guilty little thing to confess. I have a plug-in hybrid electric Chrysler Pacifica, and that thing can actually out-accelerate most of these sport cars because the internal combustion engine is so inefficient that when I'm accelerating using my electric motor and my gas, because they'll both kick in together, I could leave most of those guys in the dust. That's true. Electric acceleration is just so much better than fossil fuel acceleration. And electric cars are also safer. They have fewer moving parts, so they have less repairs. And so even though the upfront cost is still maybe higher than fossil fuels, because of the fuel cost savings, you'll save $20,000 if you drive an electric car just from the fuel cost savings. If you're the typical driver who drives 15,000 miles a year for 15 years, that's a $20,000 fuel savings, and that way outweighs the $5,000 or $6,000 higher cost of the car. Plus, there are tax credits still to actually even out the upfront cost of the electric car. Well, anything you'd like to add? Anything that we didn't cover? No, I think we covered quite a bit. So thanks very much. All right. Well, thank you, Mark, for taking the time. I really appreciate it, and you've reassured me a little. I appreciate that too. Yeah, he did reassure me a little. That's good, but. He's the atmospheric scientist with all the PhDs, so probably you should listen to him. But I actually don't. So this
is just more proof that we have a little bit of time to get this done. Not very much, but a little. Yeah, we get on it now.
We do have a little. It's not lost, but I actually still don't quite understand if the amount that the plants take out of the atmosphere is the same this year as last year or comparable, shouldn't the drop have been the same no matter where the peak was? But he's saying that because the peak was lower, we shouldn't expect as big of a drop. So, but one thing we will know is what is July. Okay, so July's numbers should continue the sharper drop. So if July stays about the same as June did, then I think even Mark might start panicking.
Yeah.
I'll check back with him. But very reassuring, very optimistic. Love talking to Mark Jacobson because he is just so laser focused on the solutions.
Right.
I love people like that want to actually fix things. So, and I also love our advertisers and patrons because they help us put this show on. For Green Futures brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. The Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's several ways to get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. Another is to go to their website at wcparks.org. And, of course, they have a nifty app, which you go to the App Store and any app store and just search for WC Parks. And as I said, they've got programs going on, like they have canoeing over at the WW Night in Perrysburg. And I actually happened to notice when I was going on my walk that they are hiring. They're looking for people for seasonal employees. So if you like working outdoors and you're just sitting around not knowing what to do with yourself this summer, consider putting in an application at the Wood County Parks. And tell them Joe sent you. So that's the Wood County Park District. We also have our patrons. These are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. And they've looked at their different levels that they could choose to be a member. They picked the monthly amount that matches their budgets so that there's no pain or suffering in any direction here. This is a cruelty-free sponsorship program. And, every month a little bit comes out of their checking account, comes over to us, and that's how we can afford to keep bringing you this show. Well, there's our advertisers and patrons. And now let's go on to Rebecca. Rebecca has a special report on tomatoes. Is that correct?
There's a whole song about that. Nobody knows. It's like gyros, gyros. It's one of those things. In Aztec, it's tomato in the Nahuatl language.
Tomato.
So
Okay.
yeah, that's really gonna get everybody on both sides of the tomato debate upset with you, though.
Okay.
Right. So tomatoes are in fact in the nightshade family, with potatoes, some nettles, and deadly nightshades, of course.
Yeah, they look like little tomatoes, the deadly nightshade fruits. If you ever look at them. Yeah, don't eat them. Stay away.
Really don't. Yeah. Technically, the tomato is a berry. It's a fruit. In fact, it's actually a berry. It's the fruit because it's the ovary of a plant. Also in this category are bell peppers, cucumbers, green beans, eggplants, avocados, squashes. A lot of stuff that we think of as a vegetable is in fact a fruit. Only in the case of tomatoes, there was a court case about it in 1893. This is to do with tariffs. There was a tariff of 1883 that taxed fruits and vegetables differently. Uh-huh. So it was settled that, legally speaking, although it's technically a fruit, for tax purposes, it's a vegetable. So
wow. So yeah, the U.S. government at work again. Okay.
There you go. As I mentioned, the name comes from the Nahuatl word tomato, which means swelling fruit or water swollen fruit, or if you've ever had a tomato in your garden, they overnight they seem to have grown a few centimeters. You can see, and they swell so much that they crack their skin and all kinds of crazy stuff. You got to stake them or they'll end up on the ground. And yeah, so that they picked the name well there, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the the Aztecs originally had tomatillos, those little sort of little green, looking tomato-y, the little green ones.
Right.
And those were what they called tomatals. And then eventually the Aztecs started breeding. They probably got them from, somebody else who was there before, Toltecs or somebody. But they started breeding the larger, sweeter red tomatoes, and they called them jitomates, which means fat water with navel.
Okay.
Little fat guy with lots of water and a belly button, yeah. So in Latin, they're lycopersicum. That's their official name is Solanum lycopersicum, although it's actually from a Greek word. Lycopersicum means wolf peach. So,
isn't it interesting how the Romans, Latin and Greeks had these words that for something that they never ever saw because they never had them during their civilizations.
Right. So I don't know. This is just what I hear. But yeah. Okay. So tomatoes came to the Old World because the Spaniards got them from the Aztecs in the 1500s. Although they sort of generally originated in Central and South America, had been around for a while. And of course, we think of like Italian cuisine being all about tomatoes and noodles, but in fact, those come from South America and Asia, respectively. So it's more cosmopolitan than you realize. Tomato bush, it's a bush, basically, as a plant. They grow about 3 to 10 feet in height if you stake them and stuff, or at least they can do. They're actually perennials in their native habitat. It's just in the temperate zone that they can leave. I think they live up to 3 years in a greenhouse. So they're not really long-lived perennials, but they're perennials. Technically speaking, but they're obviously up here. They die every winter. We grow them as annuals.
I see. So with global warming, we might not have to replant our garden every year.
There we go. Yeah, just let it sit there, see what it does. Once winter goes away, of course, we may all be on fire by then, so that's bad. The berries, the fruit is technically a berry. Tomato is a berry. They characteristically are between 1/2 inch to 4 inches, and they live. I already said that they can live 3 years in a greenhouse. Tomatoes are dicots, which I could not remember my grade school science. So apparently they're dicots because they have a terminal bud, which must be trimmed in order to get the lateral buds to grow. So if you want your tomatoes to be very fluffy and tomato-full, you better trim that top bud there at the end of this, whatever the.
Well, I think dicots technically just mean that something
about embryos, right?
Yeah, they have the dicotyledons. They have the 2 leaves that come out.
Okay.
When the first shoot comes up before the real leaves come out.
As opposed to monocots, which only had 1. Okay,
right,
it's coming back to me now.
Yeah, there you go.
Interestingly, to the fuzz that's all over the tomato plant actually can turn into roots when it's in contact with moist soil, especially if there's been a problem with the main root. So there's huge variation apparently in the shape and color of the leaves. Just, if you want to identify a tomato, don't go by the leaves. Look at the tomato-y thing. Make sure it's big, though, because otherwise it might be a nightshade. And so frightening fact here, that everyone might want. This is the most interesting thing I found about tomatoes. Apparently, in laboratory, they're very closely related to potatoes. In laboratories, tomato hybrid has been created.
Oh, great! Can it like walk out of the garden?
I don't know. Probably not. I just don't know what that would be like. It's like they're so different in texture. How would that work? But you have to admit it would make a really great sequel to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Yeah,
it's a perfect idea for like some kind of cheesy horror movie Frankenfruit thing.
I guess that would be. The goal was French fries that have ketchup in them.
Right. Pre-ketchup, prearranged. Yeah.
I don't know. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Rebecca. And I could attest to the leaves being so different because we planted several different varieties of tomatoes this year. And some of them, look just like potato plants, except they've got tomatoes on them.
Right. Yeah. That's how you tell.
my favorite variety of tomato actually is the Roma. I like Roma's the best, but if you have a favorite tomato, give us a call.
They're also the cheapest usually at the grocery store, aren't they?
That's also partly why I like them. But but you can call us 877-909-1007. And we did get a text from a listener who said they could confirm that we have a weak signal today. So, don't be afraid to switch over to the internet. And they asked about what happened to the polka show. And the answer is nothing. The polka show aired as normal. So they are at their usual time slot. So 6 to 9 a.m. So for those of you who are wondering what happened to the polka show, you might not have been able to get the signal. But that's it for this comment. And anyone else is welcome to comment at 419-973-5841. Okay, now on to ecological news and information that we have gleaned during the week. And the first story, I have to admit, I got kind of tricked by an internet meme that it was a photo, a very moving photo of a keeper who was basically saying goodbye to the last male white rhino. He had his hand on his nose, and it was clear he was about to cry. And that the last male white rhino was taking his last breaths. And I thought, oh wow, that's terrible. I got to report on that. That actually, though, when I started doing the research on it, the meme actually was put out in 2018. The last male rhino passed away in 2018, and it's just one of these memes that keeps popping up that is sort of immortal on the internet because it's such a moving picture. And New York Times Magazine did a story back in January 6th with the title "Last Two White Rhinos on Earth" by Sam Anderson. And because there are still 2 female white rhinos, but there's no male to mate with them, and all the attempts at artificial insemination with white rhinos have failed. Not a single victory there.
Did they fail because the people attempting them were trampled to death?
No.
They had a plan to deal with that eventuality.
No, apparently these white rhinos, at least the last few of them, all the articles said they had the temperament of like a puppy.
Except when a puppy gets frisky, you just put it down.
Well, they were very friendly.
Right.
Yeah, they would let people pet them. They would let people feed them carrots. I wouldn't
want one getting too frisky around me. Is all I'm saying.
They're practically tame.
Okay.
Including the last 2, which are still there. So no, but that whole basically as they were dying out, because as recently as the 1980s, there were still thousands of them. As they were dying out, they did the whole let's grab a bunch of them and put them in the zoo and try to breed them in captivity. And with white rhinos, that just failed completely. And so they finally admitted defeat and put the last couple back into the wild, thinking maybe that'll get the juices flowing and they'll be able to conceive. But it didn't. And so, it just a reminder that there is no substitute for the healthy ecosystem and the wild animals. Right. Zoos don't make a really good protection against extinction.
Well, you just can't have enough to, have a nice, big, diverse, genetically population, can you? I mean,
it's very, very
eventually,
difficult.
Sooner or later, like maybe you could save them in the zoo, but you got to have a healthy ecosystem and put them back in.
Right. Exactly. And so that's where the focus should be. If you're forced to do the desperate zoo measures, so it does work with some species,
right? But
other species don't.
So it's just kind of a desperate last-minute gamble, yeah.
Yeah. So the white rhino,
apparently they don't make good pets. So
well, they make
option.
No. The white rhino is functionally extinct and has been since 2018. But I just, it just struck a chord, and I just wanted to remember the passing of that animal, that whole species, which has been around for roughly 50 million years in the fossil record. So, but now they're gone. And of course, this is happening right now with thousands of species. Not everyone gets an article in the New York Times Sunday magazine because they're not as friendly and beautiful and
because you're just some kind of plankton that nobody cares about.
Right. And so, but it's worth remembering that
except for the other critters that eat you, they care a lot.
Yeah, that's true. They're missing you.
They are. Yeah.
But another thing to remember, on to our next story, is HB6.
Oh, good old HB6. Yeah. The gift that keeps on giving.
The story that won't die.
The zombie story.
Yes. And so huge news this past week. First Energy basically admitted to everything.
Wow.
First Energy basically said, yeah, we bribed people, you know. We gave this guy $4 billion. We gave that guy, you know, $60 billion. We were bribing people left and right. But of course, since this is a litigious America, they can't name the people. They have to say public official number 1 and public official number 2. And some public, you know, it's kind of like they're saying we gave money to an overweight farmer who's balding and who used to be in a really high office in the Ohio House, but they cannot say Larry Householder.
Right.
Yeah. So that's because Larry Householder.
We want to say who, but his initials might have been Larry Householder.
Yeah, but Larry Householder is innocent until proven guilty, legally speaking. So,
right.
So they're not allowed to say it. But you know, nobody in Columbus has. You know, everyone in Columbus has the opinion of, you know, who public official number 1 is. Now, who public official number 2 is a little more dicey, a little more. There has been some speculation that number 2 could actually be the governor.
Oh boy,
DeWine. Yeah, but now this is not saying it was the governor, because of course everyone's innocent till proven guilty, and the governor is very specific, saying this was not him. So we have to take that into account. But who it was then will come out, because part of this deal that First Energy made with the federal prosecutors was that they would cooperate with the federal government in prosecuting everybody else who was involved. So they've admitted guilt. They've come right out and said,
they cut a deal. Okay.
Yeah, this is a plea deal. And as part of this plea deal, they have to pay a $236 million fine. Or $230 million fine. But, and this is one of those things that just makes you shake your head. Half the fine goes into the federal treasury. Okay, you know, it's a federal prosecution, committed federal crimes. Okay, you're paying a federal penalty. That's half. The other half is going into a fund maintained by the state of Ohio to help poor people pay their electric bills.
Is that PIP?
The percentage of income. Yeah, the percentage of income.
Yeah, we've been trying to get on that for a couple months, but it's, you know, some crap. We can't get my birth certificate for Michigan, and then it turned out to actually be a registered copy, and it can't be they need a registered copy and not an original, so we have to do it all over again, and it's going to take weeks. And
right. So the other half of the money would go into PIP, except.
And we must assume that at some point, maybe some poor people will be able to navigate the red tape and get on that.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Which is a very poorly run program, according to some people. But the thing about that is that the money will then be used to pay First Energy electric bills.
Oh, yeah, great.
Yeah, so half the money of this penalty is First Energy basically saying, "Oh, okay, we'll give it to you, and then you're going to give it right back to us, right?" And so I think
why are they still doing business? You know, if a corporation is a person, then you put them in jail. Don't let them do. Well, apparently, there is something historically where originally corporations were authorized by the king, and so if the king, it's Latin for by whose authority. It's like a very old legal thing. Like if the king didn't like something you're doing, you could say, okay, who told you could do that? Basically, you're done, buddy.
Well,
which we could still revive, but I don't.
Yeah, but so they're not done, and they're going to pay a $230 million fine. They have to cooperate with prosecuting everybody else. The federal government's going to prosecute. And there's 2 things I wanted to get through on this, though. A, this is kind of like Al Capone admitting guilt and turning in all his lieutenants. So, you know, but B, in these court documents, they put out some of the communications between the top executives who are carrying out this scheme, this bribery scheme. And, you know, when you're fighting a big corporation like First Energy, you don't really know what's going on at the top. You don't know what these guys are thinking. Part of you wants to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, you know, they're just trying to make money for their shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. No. These communications show these guys were jerks. And in fact, Josh, do we have the beep sound for profanity? Can you? No? Okay. Rebecca, can you provide me with a beep when I signal you?
I'm not good at that. I can't see.
That's
okay.
all right, because we can't use this word on the air.
All right.
But after House Bill 6 passed, one of these executives took a picture of Mount Rushmore and photocopied Sam Randazzo's face on it, who was one of the he was appointed by the governor to be head of PUCO, Public Utilities Commission, and he was one of the people that pushed this bill the hardest. So he photoshopped Sam Randazzo onto Mount Rushmore and put the phrase, he said, "Meep." House Bill 6, anyone who's not us.
Right. Redacted.
Right. And, he used the F word. And he said, now we can go back, triple exclamation points, for more. Right. So they just got $1 billion pushed through the legislature. And I think that maybe that phrase, I'm going to signal you again,
redacted.
Anyone who's not us. I think that should be First Energy's new mission statement. It's better than it's more accurate than their current mission statement, which is, we are a forward-thinking electric utility powered by a diverse team of employees committed to making customers' lives brighter, the environment better, and our community stronger. I think anyone who's not us actually sums up.
There was like a European brand of car horn or something, and I just did. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that was good. That did the job, Rebecca.
Okay.
Yeah. So big news there, and of course it also means that the House Bill 6 story is still not over, because even though they've admitted guilt, there's still a lot of people who are claiming innocence. Although it gets much harder to claim innocence when, the person or the entity that gave the bribes admitted to giving bribes.
Yep.
So we'll have to see what happens with that. We will continue to follow it. And of course, my thinking was that $120 million, rather than going, I think they should have just forgiven $120 million worth of electric bills. They could do that.
Yeah.
And B, the $230 million has to be put in context. Last year, First Energy made $1 billion in profit. So $230 million is a slap, but it's kind of a slap in the wrist.
It's like a parking ticket,
but not with the ruler.
Murder.
But finally, I think that 120 some million should have gone to Ohio Citizen Action.
Do you know what would happen to me if I stole something that got caught stealing something that cost $100 at the mall?
I'd
be in jail for a very long time.
Yeah. No, it's not fair. So I think they should have given that money to all the opponents of House Bill 6 that fought so hard to try to prevent it from happening, because they were absolutely right, and First Energy was absolutely wrong to push this bill through. And as anyone who listens to the show knows, we fought it tooth and nail.
What a bunch of stinkers.
Yeah, so, all right. Well, I think that's it for this week. Gosh, thanks all so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
Them nukes, run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia.